Access to internet means access to information. To information, to networks, to ideas, to jobs, to all that you need to make your way through modern society. As you know, I'm social democrat. During our early days in the end of the 19th century, in the so-called Industrial Revolution, one key idea of the workers' movement was education. Give every child a book was their slogan. My position is we should not be eager to replace the book. That is still necessary. But it's perhaps necessary to modernize our slogans and to add the sentence, give every child a book, by an additional sentence, give every child, in addition to that, a laptop. For in the 21st century, equal opportunity should include equal digital opportunity. If we fail at that, if we make the internet exclusive or unaffordable for some, the world of tomorrow will be even more unequal than it is already today. And we should avoid that. I stand here as a representative of the state. If you and I agree on the multi-stakeholder model, you might ask me, what is the role of the state in all of this? When I look at this question in the broader public debate, I find that people are worried about two completely different things that pull into quite different directions. On the one hand, there is a fear of the omnipotent state, the fear that the age of big data is turning into an age of Big Brother. Here is what I think. I think the state has an important role to play in internet governance, but it can only do so if it's building trust. Trust with all stakeholders. I have been describing own citizens, international partners, business, users, and so on. The practices, look at the pictures. The practices revealed by Edward Snowden have done the opposite. They have eroded the trust in European governments and in Europe's most important ally, the United States, and that's a setback, believe me, that's a setback for all of us. Yes, we need to balance freedom and security, but the balance needs to be reasonable. And the instruments of security need to be proportional to the costs they impose on our privacy. Rebuilding trust and discussing reasonable standards is what we hope to do when we, the German Foreign Office, welcome our American partners to what is happening the week after next week, to a transatlantic cyber dialogue here in Berlin. But, ladies and gentlemen, on the other hand, I also sense in the public the opposite fear, the fear of an impotent state. People are worried that Big Brother lurks when they are searching for a restaurant or order a book online. And they wonder who really makes the rules about all these data? Governments or big corporations? My view on this is the mirror image of what I have just said about trust. Big corporations need it also. The trust of their regulators and most of all, the trust of their customers. That sorts bring big business to the table when we debate internet governance in a forum such as here today. Ladies and gentlemen, it is between these two extremes, these fears, that the state has to steer its course. Yes, the internet is a free and open space, but it is not, and it should not be, a legal vacuum. We need standards, and we will need them more and more because the internet will keep growing. Today there are about 2.5 billion internet users worldwide. In only 5 years, the number will be doubled. In such an ever more connected world, the invisible hand won't do what we need. We need reliable and transparent standards, and it is states and international organizations who will have to coordinate and enforce them. That brings me to my last point. Internet governance is a concern not only for nations alone, but believe me, also for foreign policy. After all, one of the great things about internet is that it transcends borders. And we should make sure to keep it in that way. In fact, national rules will be useless if they are not embedded in international standards. In many ways, our situation today reminds me of the debate we had on climate change some years ago. A global challenge can only have global solutions. That thought got us started at the climate conference in Rio years ago. And that thought holds true for internet governance, from my point of view, for internet governance as well. I just hope it won't take those in power as long to realize it. But we have started the process, you know that, by taking initiative for a global right of privacy in the General Assembly of the United Nations. Now, you experience I have started my speech in Sao Paulo and ended it in Rio. You must think I'm obsessed with the World Cup. That starts in Sao Paulo tonight and will end sometimes in Rio. I assure you, this was really pure coincidence, but what can I say? I'm a German and I do have hopes. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much for this fantastic site all over the world, although we're EuroDIG. So let's see how we can end in Europe somehow. So let me introduce the next speaker. This will be a video from Neelie Kroes from the European Commission. Can you play the video?
Dear friends, you are gathered to talk about an important set of issues concerning the Internet. How we can continue to ensure a global resource delivering digital development, democracy and freedom across the world. I wish I were there with you, because I know we agree on a great deal, in particular on the need for governance that is open, inclusive, transparent and multi-stakeholder. But that is also the reason why I can't be with you today. I reorganized my schedule this week to go to Geneva, addressing the World Summit on the Information Society. And I felt my participation in Geneva was needed in order to insist that a multi-stakeholder approach is the way forward. Because if the Internet is to be unified, global and inclusive, we need to have all stakeholders on board, all stakeholders from all countries. The alternative is to see the network fragment and see its many benefits shattered too. The sad fact is that there are some countries that are prepared to see the internet fragment if it allows them to get more control. And I made the assessment that those countries are in Geneva this week, not in Berlin. So I went to speak to them, and my starting point was the Net Mundial meeting in Sao Paulo. The Net Mundial conference gave us something valuable to work with, and now we need to ensure it becomes a roadmap everyone can follow. I believe strongly in the multi-stakeholder model, but my approach is not to ignore those who advocate a different approach. Rather, it is to understand them, address them, and find our common ground, and also to reassure them. As we saw at Sao Paulo, some governments are not comfortable with being treated the same as everyone else. While we can help each other to adapt to the multi-stakeholder way, we can also acknowledge that governments do have a legitimate role. They have a right and a duty to protect human rights and the rule of law. But that doesn't mean a government takeover of the internet, because I believe the internet is innovative, diverse and adaptable enough to respond to local needs, without fragmenting or losing its unified character, without foregoing its foundation as a forum for fundamental rights, without having to surrender the significant advantages of the multi-stakeholder system. If you believe that too, then I hope you will join with me in convincing others. I call on all European stakeholders to devote the coming months to elaborate recommendations, commitments and proposals that will contribute to concrete reforms of how the internet is run. Europe should of course agree on its common values, champion them and defend them. That includes defending the multi-stakeholder model. Europe's uniqueness lies in its diversity and in its ability to come to terms with the complexities that this implies. This is where Europe's strength lies, its historical vocation towards inclusive, democratic and pluralistic approaches to governance. And this is the added value the EU wants to bring to the debate, building on our solid tradition of democracy and respect of differences. And that is why EuroDIG is so important. It contributes to make Europe a reference player in internet governance. And at the same time it provides a connection with the global IGF to ensure the European point of view is adequately reflected in the global discussions. If we want to strengthen the IGF, we also need to strengthen its links to regional fora like EuroDIG. So I wish you all the best with your discussions and look forward to working together at the IGF in Istanbul. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cruz. I don't think she will hear me. Thank you very much, Minister Steinmeier. I understand that you have other appointments and already late. Anyway, we now have the discussion from the governmental view, which we just heard from Minister Steinmeier and Neelie Kroes, to all the stakeholders. And the show is run by Jeanette Hoffmann.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our opening panel on the roadmap for internet governance. The organizing team of EuroDIG decided to focus two broad themes in this first session. The first one is the impact of Sao Paulo and Net Mundial on Europe and on the respective organizations of our panelists. And the second topic covers the multi-stakeholder approach, something that nowadays almost everybody seems to celebrate. Still, there is some criticism and some concerns that need to be addressed. So we will ask the question of in what ways the multi-stakeholder approach needs to be improved. We have just 1 hour, so without further ado, I will introduce our distinctive panelists. First, there is the Minister of Information Society and Administration of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Ivo Ivanovski. Would you please come up to the panel? Second, there is Niels Muzienieks, Commissioner of Human Rights at the Council of Europe. Then we have from the German government, Dirk Brengelmann, German Foreign Office, the Commissioner of International Cyber Policy. And Detlef Dauke, Director General of the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy. Then there is from ICANN, President and CEO Fadi Shehadeh. You even heard him, Michael Rother, President of the Association of the German Internet Industry, ECHO. And then, as a commentator, we have Kathy Brown, President and CEO of ISOC. So what have we learned from Sao Paulo, if we have learned anything, and what is the impact of the Net Mundial process and statement on... Oh, I'm so sorry, there is a chair missing for the commentator. Perhaps we could find one. Somebody should have counted chairs. So the fact that we have a Commissioner of Human Rights on the opening panel of a EuroDIG meeting as such already indicates a change that has taken place over the last years. It was always a bit of a struggle to include human rights as an issue into internet governance settings and processes. So my first question to Niels would be, when you look at the human rights section of the Sao Paulo statements and the 6 to 8 principles included there, what do you think? Do you regard this as a progress, or do you think it's a bit meager and that the title Human Rights and Shared Values actually diminishes the weight that human rights should have with regard to the internet?
Does it work? Now it works. I think it's a good start, but it's only a start. And I'm very pleased to be invited here. I think it's actually, to be honest, many human rights people, especially intergovernmental organizations, are only now beginning to learn about the internet more and try to apply the principles of human rights to the digital world. It's a good start. The principle of accountability is key, and in the end, it is primarily, but not solely, states that are accountable. We can talk about this later in the multi-stakeholder, in the question about multi-stakeholder governance. But I'm worried because I think that we're moving too slowly to try to understand how human rights apply to the many threats and risks that we see. The threats of arbitrary blocking and filtering of the internet, the threats of mass surveillance, the threats of disproportionate data retention, and there's a real need to strengthen the rule of law and human rights on the internet, and to bring in the courts to oversee the governments and have the governments oversee more effectively what is going on within the private sector.
And what would you suggest as next steps after Sao Paulo? How would you try to keep the momentum of what we started there?
Well, I think that a number of questions were raised there that require urgent attention. The question of jurisdiction. In Europe alone, we have competing and conflicting approaches to a number of crucial human rights issues affecting freedom of expression in particular. different approaches to libel, different approaches to hate speech. And when one state extends its jurisdiction outside of its own borders, then we get into some very serious conflicts and trouble. So I think we need to tackle these issues of jurisdiction straight on. And I think we need to think about, my own view is that the whole Snowden revelations revealed the utter weakness of democratic oversight of security services. And we need to have a very robust discussion about how to strengthen that and how to bring surveillance within the rule of law.
Okay, thank you. Ivo, you were involved in the preparatory process of the Sao Paulo meeting. Did the outcome actually meet your expectations?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's very kind of you, and congratulations for collecting such a group of experts. I was part of the high-level panel for Internet governance mechanisms, together with President of ICANN, Farid Shihari, and Kathy Brown, and many other experts around the world. And during the preparatory meeting, we did submit our ideas of what should be focused on the Net Mondial. And I have to say that we are very pleased that the majority of our recommendations were very much accepted in Net Mondial, and the outcome of the Net Mondial, the wording that was for the next steps, were overlapping with what we did at the high-level panel for Internet governance. One of the key topics that we talked about was enablers. Enablers meaning providing the people the information on time, providing them the mechanism, so those mechanisms can help them accurately and on time to make decisions, smart decisions. And those enablers, what we had envisioned were this kind of forums, like it's being done one over here at the EuroDIG, forums, dialogues, continued communication among the people, among all the multi-stakeholder which are eager to participate in creating an internet which will be better for all of us. More innovations, more job creations, security, and everything else that is needed. So I have to say that we are very pleased with the outcomes of Net Mondial. And we have to continue with the recommendations that came for the Net Mondial and the other issues that were left aside.
What would you say should be the next step?
I would just say that we need to have more of these kind of dialogues and forums in all levels, not just governments, NGOs, private sector, and we need to keep the momentum from Net Mondial in order to have a decision by end of or middle of 2015 where the internet, because of the deadline I believe is from the US State Department for ICANN and the IANA, is middle of 2015. So we need to focus on the United Nations, the Internet Government Forums. Countries should have this kind of meetings and create all the necessary mechanisms in order for the multi-stakeholder system to function and everybody to participate at the equal level with the equal vote.
And vote? Vote?
Equal level, vote? Equal
vote.
Yeah, participation, yes.
And how would you, if somebody asked you to transform, to improve the IGF process, what would be your recommendation?
IGF process, I think we need to finance better the IGF process, if you ask me. I think it's an important forum. Not enough resources are put into IGF. It's something that many governments should participate in more actively. Mm-hmm. It's open process, then anybody can participate. Mm-hmm. And I think we can see in September what will be the outcome of this IGF, since we have such a good guidance from Net Mondial.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Brengelmann, I'm not sure you've noticed, by the way, there's no civil society person sitting on this panel. It's multi-stakeholder, but not as multi as we would wish. So I was asked to sort of speak on behalf, ask a question on behalf of civil society. As you probably noticed, there were quite a few people in Sao Paulo who were unhappy with the outcome. In the sort of last round, lots of people did not get up, they did not applaud, they were just sitting there, and their concern was that the multi-stakeholder statement did not reflect to a sufficient degree the criticism that actually led to this process. What would you say to them? Do you think they are right?
me start with reminding all of us how that all started. It was an initiative jointly by the Brazilian president, Dilma Rousseff, and you know why she got engaged, and by Fadi Sheade. So I would like to give credit to both the Brazilian government and Fadi and ICANN for launching this process, which happened because there was a new political momentum. And in this sense, it was always clear that Sao Paulo would not be just on ICANN and IANA, but was a wider debate. We contributed to that debate by a set of proposed principles, which we sent to the preparatory committee. And I think in the final analysis, we are satisfied with the outcome of the Net Mundial. You can always expect or want more. Yes, clearly I could like more, but on the other hand...
the Foreign Office?
Sorry?
We means the Foreign Office?
We, in this sense, now Germany. And I think we could see a lot of our proposals in the text, and we could see a lot of the language from the German-Brazilian resolution in the text on privacy. So for us, it was important that this language was consolidated. It was repeated in the Net Mundial, so it was transferred from the resolution into the Net Mundial document. I know that some in civic society wanted more, but for us to have that repeated was already a good outcome. And now we want to move ahead after we have seen the report which we expect from the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which should come out shortly, and then we'll have another chance to see where we are and how we can continue. Just one quick word from my side on the multi-stakeholder situation which we had in Sao Paulo, which was an interesting one, and I think most people would agree that this experiment, while sometimes a bit difficult, in the end was a worthwhile experiment, and we shouldn't lose that momentum. And when I say we shouldn't lose the momentum, I refer to recent discussions which we have seen in particular in Geneva. I think it was Nelly Kroes who made it quite clear, and I can only agree to that it seemed that in Sao Paulo some governments found it a little bit more difficult than others to accept a situation where any business representative, NGO representative, etc., would have same chance to queue for the mic, to sit around when the paper were written, etc. And you could observe that. Many different reactions to that, but some, let me put it that way, some sense of uneasiness was prevalent with some delegations. And that now we feel when we go to Geneva and have other discussions, and I think we need to prevail in that debate and make sure that what we experienced in Sao Paulo was not a one-off situation. It may be a one-off event, but it should not be a one-off situation. And that means we should take the lessons learned from this into the process to prepare the IGF, etc. The IGF sometimes is being criticized. For me, it was one of my first meetings when I came into my office last year in August. I went to the IGF in Bali, and I must say, yes, people portray it as a shop talk from time to time. But for me, it was a very interesting experience in terms of informal debate, meet all the relevant players, multi-stakeholders, and yes, there were decisions, I can tell you. There were a lot of informal meetings where the Sao Paulo conference had been prepared, so it was not without impact. That's how I would like to portray it. Thank you.
Could I come back to my question regarding civil society and being unhappy with the substance of the statement? I don't think they minded the process, but they thought the substance was lacking.
I did address that point because I said that I was in the end happy that the language from the German-Brazilian resolution made it into the final document of the Net Mundial. You notice that more than that at the stage in Sao Paulo was not possible. But for me it is important that we were able to consolidate the outcome of those negotiations in the third committee in that wider body called Net Mundial. So for me that was positive.
Thank you. Fadi, the roadmap also covered the privatization of the IANA functions and the future of ICANN. What message did you take home from Sao Paulo?
Thank you, Jeanette. It's good to see you again in Sao Paulo. I took the message that the train of ICANN globalization and the end of the US government unique role in ICANN has left the station, and there's no return. It has to be done. Now, the road is difficult. There will be bumps in the road, but there is no return. We have to get this job done, and we will get it done. We published a few days ago, after receiving over 1,000 comments from the community, a detailed process forward that is inclusive, open, and where ICANN actually steps back and lets the community lead. We even removed any interference by ICANN board into how the community will lead this debate. I want to make a point about this important independence of ICANN from the role of one government, in this case the US government. I described it as removing the training wheels off of a bicycle. For those of us who have children, have you removed the training wheels off your children's bicycles at some point? And the real question is, did you put back new training wheels? And the answer is no. That would really break the child. So the US government put training wheels on ICANN. They were supposed to remove these 14 years ago. Let's not debate why it didn't happen. They finally announced they're ready to remove these wheels. It does not mean we must replace the wheels. The bicycle needs to be strong enough to finish its course. If the bicycle is not good, let's tune it up. Let's make ICANN better. Let's enforce its mechanisms. Let's make it a better place to solve problems. Let's put recourse so people have a mechanism to go for a recourse. But the bicycle does not need a new governmental or intergovernmental oversight. It needs to be strengthened and to prove to the world that multi-stakeholderism can manage this particular process.
What was, going back to the roadmap, what was important for you in this statement? Because the general understanding is that if you weren't involved in the process, it's very difficult to understand what the contested issues were and what was achieved. So perhaps you could help interpret a bit what was important for ICANN in the roadmap section.
What is important for ICANN is important for all of us. And that is that, as the foreign minister very well put it, we had a process at a very high level that included all stakeholders. The process was actually the big outcome. And in fact, when you hear our friends from Russia object vehemently at the end of that conference, it wasn't about the substance. It was about the process. Because the process worked. Because in fact, we were able to prove that it's not one stakeholder over another. I also want to say something about the process that I thought was remarkable, and the foreign minister today touched on it. We must end, and at Net Mundial we did this to a degree, end this multi-stakeholder versus multilateral fight. Unlike football, in the real Mundial, there is a final winner. Here, we do not need to have a winner. Multi-stakeholderism includes multilateralism. How else can ICANN describe the Governmental Advisory Committee? The GAC is a multilateral body that meets, discusses things amongst governments. It's within the multi-stakeholder process. Let's stop the fight between one or the other. They both have their uses. The foreign minister today said it's governments that need to implement some of these policies. They have a role. We need to welcome governments, include them, and make them part of the multi-stakeholder process. And then one question that I need to answer, if I could, you asked my colleagues, what happens after Net Mundial? This is a very important question. Net Mundial was a meeting, and that meeting was thought to be a one-time meeting, and it will be a one-time meeting. But what came out of Net Mundial from the process and the principles, which were significant, I think needs to fuel global alliances, as the report by President Thomas Ilves concluded a few weeks after Net Mundial. We need global alliances that include governments, that include private sector, that include all the stakeholders, civil society, technical organizations, that then carry the messages of Net Mundial forward. This is needed. And if it does not happen, we will go back to the polarized world of Net Mundial versus Geneva. In order to forge forward, we need to take the precious middle ground that was created in Brazil and strengthen it with real alliances. And that will happen in the weeks and months ahead.
Thank you, Fadi. Michael, you yesterday spoke about the hype of Net Mundial. May I assume that you are a bit more skeptical about the process and its outcome than the other panelists?
Well, in principle, you are right. I think it was a very good kickoff moment with Net Mundial. And it's the first time that we have written principles where everyone can read and does not have to search for a long time to see these principles in a row. But now it's up to all the other stakeholders to work on these issues. And this is why I'm saying, and Fadi described it quite well, he said it started a process, yes. It's only the way which was described and not the result. And if I look at the paper, and Dirk Brengelmann said that the German part came in, I'm happy about this because the basic, as Brazil run its own multi-stakeholder model within the country, which was the basis to the paper, I guess, that was something I wouldn't like to see in Europe. And finally, it was modified, and it was a rough consensus. That's why I'm a little bit satisfied, but I'm not overwhelming about the result. It depends. If it has really impact on the next IGF, or even to EuroDIG here, I might think differently.
What would impact then be in order to qualify as real impact?
Oh, the impact would be that all stakeholders here from Europe at the EuroDIG look at the principles and look at the paper, especially on the roadmap for the future. I mean, what happened in the past happened in the past. Look at the roadmap in the future and see if they can agree, or how do we have to transform it to fit into the European environment. This would be something where I could rethink, well, it was worthwhile to have the Net Mundial.
I'm asking because when you get really involved in these processes, you might be easily satisfied with paper impacting other papers. And at some point, we need to ask ourselves how we translate paper into actions, decisions, and structures, right?
Absolutely, but here at EuroDIG, we have the fantastic situation that we can talk about it and learn what people who were following Net Mundial from the distance and have heard of it, have read it, and how they think about it and how they think it would fit into a European environment. We are EuroDIG. Net Mundial was something larger. And this is why Fadi said it's the process, it's a way. And now we can see, does this process fit into EuroDIG, or where do we have to adapt this process so it fits into Europe?
Thank you. Mr. Dauke, we heard from the foreign minister how Dirk Brengelmann, what he told his ministry when he came back. So what was the message that you brought back from Sao Paulo?
Yes, in the first moment I want to say that I, as a member of the German Ministry of Economic Affairs, I underline every word Mr. Brengelmann said in this morning. I underline all the words here, and so I'm in the situation to say everything is said, not by everyone. So I want to make three small remarks. I believe that the process in Sao Paulo was not historical, but it was a big success, because first time we have a process with a result at the end, with principles. Look on other process in the same way. In the morning we heard about climate. I believe that we have a good basic now coming from Sao Paulo, so we can work on this further on. I believe that is one of the most important things is that the discussion of these principles should continue only in an environment that can guarantee a multi-stakeholder process approach in the decision-making process that we must work on. I don't believe that intergovernmental organizations are able to bring this process in a good situation. And the outcome and the experience we made in Brazil was not always, it was a little bit hard, and it was, can make some critical points in this process. But the experience is that this is a process we can put on other process in internet governance like EGF or the Summit on Information Society Review. Let's take this idea from Brazil, putting in this bar. That's the short points for me. I have no proposal, I have no solution for going on in this process. We must talk together how we can do this.
Thank you, Mr. Rauke. Now, Kathy, would you like to comment on this first round of statements?
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. I'm I love to listen to this conversation as we have it around the world. And it strikes me that something Mrs. Cruz said is so very important. The nature of the internet is that it is globally connected, allowing us all to reach each other while very, very able to adapt to regional concerns and interests. And I think this conversation about Brazil as it affects EuroDIG, as it affects Geneva, is enormously important. What happened in Brazil was an amazing energy. It came together. It was a very well organized forum in which the energy was allowed to happen, which it reflected the very nature of the internet. That is, people came together and stood on the same ground, on level ground, on the floor together, in front of mics together, speaking to each other about issues of mutual concern. Each of the parties who were there, each of the interest groups, did not achieve all they wanted to achieve. Thus, the human rights advocates were disappointed in some ways because they couldn't get all they sought. Believe me, the commercial sector was nervous. It thought it was going to be run over by some of the interests who were there. And the governments were very wide-eyed about the notion that they would be standing before a mic and speaking for only 2 minutes. And yet, over the 2 days, what happened was this notion of a shared humanity, a connectivity, and a notion that they were addressing something very important. So there was a piece of paper that came out that was incomplete, that was a start, it's been described, but was in an important iteration of a global concern expressed regionally. So we got to Geneva, and those who did not really want all this energy actually to come to fore said, well, let's just stop this right here. And what was interesting, Farid, is they used lateral kind of processes to say, we don't want to hear about this now, so let's put it aside. Unfortunate. I had this very poignant meeting with the Brazilian minister, and he said, what could happen? And I said, and why should you care? You had this regional meeting that was full of energy. You're going to have a regional meeting here today that's going to be full of energy. The internet is of its users. We are its users. We can have the energy needed to both use its potential for human rights, for organization, for organizing ourselves. We were, a number of us, involved in a very important report that spoke about this decentralized governance of the internet, that spoke about the fact that we're diverse but connected, and we have this distributed notion of how we can govern ourselves. This is what the multi-stakeholder process is about. It is about being here at EuroDIG. It is about having this be of ourselves here, but be connected to there. And so I think that as we go forward and we take the lessons of Brazil, we also have to take the lessons of Berlin, the lessons of Dubai, the lessons of Hong Kong. And together we create this global internet of internets, this global internetwork that allows us to speak together. So it seems to me that the concerns raised here by all of the various interests are important ones, and it's the dialogue that takes place not only in multi-stakeholder meetings, but online. And I think we keep moving away from the notion that the cyber community is itself a dynamic community in which it is making a lot of its own decisions, and it's self-regulating in so many ways. Looking to governments, after all, elected governments, to think about some of the large social issues, but for the most part saying, we got this.
Thank you for this passionate statement. So Dirk Brengemann wants to comment on this again. After that, I would open the discussion to the floor for questions to the panel.
Two comments to the point and what next. But before doing that, just a quick reaction to what Fadi said on the issue of multi-stakeholder versus multilateralism. I think he was hitting a very important point, because you can see that being a toxic element of the debate all the time. And we now see it again, and you know what I'm referring to by the debates we see in Geneva with the question, how much of multi-stakeholder do we really want? There still is this element of multi-stakeholder versus multilateralism. I think it has become less, but it's still there. For me, the points to do now, make sure that the momentum we had for the multi-stakeholder model in Sao Paulo is not lost by these rearguarding fights. Second, the multi-stakeholders continue to refine their respective roles, because there is still more work to be done on that front. Number three, in this particular point, then the states should work on their responsibilities, which include, for example, the work in New York by the group of governmental experts, rules of behavior. ICANN and others are doing their job there, which is the globalization, and I think very importantly also the issue of accountability. And for us, as you can imagine, we want to continue our work here on privacy. There's still more work to be done after the report, which I said. And last not least, as we are speaking about the European situation, the European digital agenda, you heard Nelly Cruz, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in Brussels, where we all, Europeans, can come together, but we need to support it. We need to make sure it is going to happen once the Commission is back in place, if I can put it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. So are there questions on this first topic regarding Net Mundial to the panelists? Yes, please. If there are more people who want to ask questions, here are microphones. You can just line up there. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Mike Wozniak from the Free and Open Source Software Foundation from Poland. And I also was to Net Mundial. And yeah, so we've heard a lot about multi-stakeholderism. We've heard a lot about lessons from Net Mundial, and we've heard a lot about how internet is for and of the users. And yet I don't see a single representative of the civil society or the users in this panel. So my question is, what exactly are the lessons that we have supposedly learned from Net Mundial? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Is it a rhetoric one, or do you want to address... Perhaps we should ask the organizers of this panel. I'm just the moderator, so completely innocent. Are there any other questions, perhaps even more specific ones? Yes.
Hello, my name is Bridget O'Loughlin. I work for the Council of Europe's No Hate Speech campaign. I actually wanted you all to know that on the Twitter wall there are a lot of comments about the fact that the panelists are all male. I find it really depressing that over 50% of the world's population is not represented. And I would invite you all to take a look at page 8 of this brochure, which seriously shocked me this morning. There are no women on the picture of what is supposedly a multi-stakeholder challenge. Thank you very much.
Good point. I'm not commenting on that. I support the statement, so. No, Wolf, he's one of the organizers. He will now explain everything to us.
Well, I will try my best. Let me say we are 100% aware about what was criticized before. We were aware that we had a male-dominated opening plenary. We tried our best to avoid it for any subsequent session, but it was always a difficult case for any EuroDIG so far, that the opening plenary are always loaded with representatives from the host country, and there are some necessities for diplomatic, whatsoever reasons we had to respect. Therefore, we brought in Cassie as a commentator, we brought in Janet as a moderator.
The token women.
And it was also our idea to have Janet as a strong representative of civil society. She is highly experienced, she is brilliant, and she could ask the questions.
Don't make it worse, I think.
Okay, we are aware about the problem and we will try to improve.
If there are no further questions, yes, please. But could that be a question on the topic and not so much on the composition of the panel? I would appreciate that.
Trying hard. My name is Jörg Schweiger. I'm CEO of the registry for Germany.de. Currently, I think we are just talking meta. We're talking about values and principles. And I think there's a reason to that. And the reason is that we just can't come up with a solution that is supported by everybody. So we start talking about values just as a reference point. And on those values, we try to build up a forthcoming governance model. But the problem would be to agree on a detailed description of those values. And I just want to remind you, for example, about the statement that Le Mondial came up with, describing what privacy meant. So my question to the panelists would be, are we prepared to accept rough consensus on an internet governance model, or are we really seeking for a global, comprehensive governance model for the future? Because that might take a couple of time. Thank you.
Could I say something with respect to that issue?
Can we just have the second question and
Yes,
then...
go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Osman Coşkunoğlu Kaskınaglı from Turkey. And I have two specific questions. One to the president of ICANN, Mr. Şahide. Excuse me if I mispronounce it. I bet you can't pronounce my last name either, so we are even. There is an office intended, in order to globalize ICANN's functions, there are two offices, one in Istanbul, the other in Singapore. I don't know what's the situation in Istanbul, number one. Number two, Turkey's government has a terrible record regarding internet. Therefore, I wonder how would that help the government to make the situation even worse or convince the government to be more respectable to the freedoms in internet. You know, the YouTube is banned, Twitter is banned, well, was until recently in Turkey, so I wonder that. That's a specific question to you. And the second question that I have is more, whoever would like to answer. We talk a lot about multi-stakeholderism. That's the buzzword nowadays. I think the weakest link in that stakeholder group is civil society. Ms. Hoffman insisted a very good question asking, civil society was not very happy with the outcome of Net Mondial. Well, because I think the mechanisms are not there to support civil society for a fair playfield with the huge power of corporations and huge power of governments. So just having them there is not sufficient, I believe. I wonder what are the specifics to empower civil societies. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I make a procedural proposal? I would ask Fadi to address the first question, and then I would sort of switch to the second part of the panel, and we can address the questions regarding the multi-stakeholder approach, because we will cover that anyway. I hope this is okay, and then Kathy can perhaps start. So, please, Fadi, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Osman, and maybe you and I can go by first name, it's easier, you can call me Fadi. So to your good question, Osman, about the globalization of ICANN, we are indeed, we have multiple tracks to globalize. One of them is what everyone talks about, the separation from the US government's unique role in IANA. But there is also the operational aspect. When I arrived at ICANN, we had 120 people, most of them in Europe and the United States. Today we have nearly 300 people. They are distributed in many countries all over the world. We divided our operations into 3 hubs, Los Angeles, Singapore, and Istanbul. And these hubs have been built. When I started, ICANN had 1 person in all of Asia. We now have 22. And the hub in Singapore is growing in importance. Similarly, in Istanbul, our hub is open. We are now operating there, and we have multiple people. I think we're up to 7 or 8. And we're growing very fast as well there. So the focus will continue. In terms of the relationship with Turkey as a country, and given the policies you have clearly, you were very clear about how you view the policies. My view personally and the view of ICANN is to engage. I mean, there were questions about the IGF in Istanbul. Do we take our ball and go away? Or do we take our ball and go play there? I think we take our ball and play there. It's good to engage. And in fact, YouTube and Twitter are back. They're not back because we weren't all playing. We were all playing there and making sure the right things happen. In fairness to the government of Turkey, I think the government of Turkey is struggling with how to play this. Monthly, there are hundreds of court orders in Turkey to shut websites. They go with these court orders to the telecommunications ministry and say, shut the website. Most of these websites are not in Turkey. It's complicated, and it needs work. And I think what we need to do is engage with the government, work with them, and explain what works and what doesn't work in a world where the transnational internet is challenging the 19th and 20th century governance models. When it challenges it, we have two reactions. One is to shut things, as we've seen. One is to try and understand how to make it work. It is our job to help governments, private sector, to do this. And just my final comment on this, because you're spot on. What will help all these come together, in my opinion, the glue that will make it all happen, is civil society. And by the way, Net Mundial's highest representation was from civil society. No, but government was there, and they need to be there. We do not want government to be out of there, but civil society.
Okay. So perhaps we can, thank you, Fai. Perhaps we can now start with the second part of our panel. We have just a bit over 15 minutes left, so we need to hurry up a bit. What is the issue here? As you can see, all the panelists love the multi-stakeholder approach, and almost everybody nowadays celebrates it. But there are shortcomings, and there is a lot of room for improvement. One of the issues frequently addressed is the question whether the multi-stakeholder approach actually privileges those with the most resources, meaning big business, who can have, just because they are many and they have a lot of money, more impact on policy process within a multi-stakeholder setting. So is the multi-stakeholder approach prone to abuse and being captured by specific particular interests? That is one of the questions. How can we improve it? I first would like to ask Niels, the multi-stakeholder approach, do you think this is the right framework for improving human rights in internet governance? Because you just said we need the order of law, and accountable to the citizens are governments and not multi-stakeholder actors.
Let me be clear.
Yes.
I am all in favor of the multi-stakeholder approach. I think that without civil society, without academia, without business at the table, you cannot move forward on these discussions, particularly on the internet. But in the end, human rights obligations and duties lie first and foremost with states, not with corporations, not with NGOs, not with it's states that are the duty bearers. And the states have to enforce the rule of law. And with regard to a consensus, in Europe we have a minimum consensus on many issues. And this is reflected in the fact that we have two transnational courts in which you have a case law on the right to privacy, on surveillance, on freedom of expression, and this is the minimum standard that applies to everybody in the European jurisdiction. We have the case law of the European Court of Human Rights, and we have the case law of the Court of Justice of the European Union. In that sense, we differ from many other regions and can offer a rule of law model. When I hear about why the role of civil society, I think we have to look at our countries, even in Europe. Is civil society an equal player in your countries with big business? Is big business up to taking on the government when the government makes illegal demands? Are they strong enough? So on the one hand, if we want a completely equal playing field internationally, I think first of all we have to achieve that domestically. And I really hope that will happen, but I don't see it happening in the near future.
Are you sure about the order of things? Is it that this has to happen to start at the national level? Why would you say that? Why could it not be the other way around, that sort of our national governments learn from transnational procedures?
No, I think that the international community can have an impact on domestic politics, domestic processes. Otherwise, I would I would throw in the hat and not do the job I'm doing, which is going around and trying to convince governments to do more for human rights. And occasionally we do have an impact. If we had no impact, I would say, forget it, I'll leave and try and go earn some money somewhere. But our impact is limited. Our impact in the end, it's at the national level where things happen. From the outside, we can push, we can provide ammunition, we can raise awareness, but in the end, it's at the national level where these struggles play out.
Ivo, do you agree with this view?
Well, I do support the multi-stakeholder. I think we all hear that.
Yes, you all do.
We have to do that. My feel is that in our report for the high-level panel for internet governance, I encourage anybody to download it and read it. It was very well documented how things need to start locally, nationally, globally, and multinationally. But depends of what the issue is. For technical issues, there are a lot of group which right now they function, and it's a procedure from issue mapping to the solution of the issue. It's in process. But for non-technical issues, there's a lot more that need to be done. And I see that multi-stakeholderism in non-technical issues need to start on some issues locally, on some they can start globally. But the important thing is that every player should have an equal say. That is what we are discussing when the multi-stakeholderism. If everybody can get involved, everybody should be on equal footing.
So the government is just one player. I mean, yesterday I heard even governments referring to themselves as stakeholders. I had never heard that before, and I'm personally skeptical about that kind of approach. But you would say the government should just be one player among others.
I agree. I think when it comes to this kind of issues, we have to be all on equal footing. Not one can survive without the other. If we want to make the smart decisions, the right decisions for our citizens, then we have to be open-minded and we have to listen to everybody what we have to say.
Now I'm a bit torn because I wanted to actually ask Mr. Brengelmann something else, but now I first want to ask you whether you agree with that government should be just one player among others.
As I said a moment before, we need to further refine the respective roles of the different stakeholders, and I think the roles are different. So we are just one of many stakeholders, but within those stakeholder groups, I think not everybody has the equal role, or the same role, I should rather say. So I think for governments, for example, when we have this discussion of rules of behavior between states when they act in the cyberspace, that is something where governments need to come together. And then you have a particular role, not of governments, but of states, which involves governments and parliaments. Because it's on that level, parliaments are setting the laws. And that is important. So whilst we are all stakeholders on an equal footing, we are not completely the same.
Thank you. Many people hope that the multi-stakeholder approach is the way to democratize the international or transnational sphere. Kathy, would you agree that this is the way to go, that multi-stakeholder processes might sort of create new legitimacy for decision-making on the international level? And that also brings me to the question of Mr. Schweigert, who asked about rough consensus. Is this actually good enough? Would it create the same kind of legitimacy that national decisions made by parliaments have?
Well, first of all, what decisions are we talking about? So when we get into these conversations, we tend to generalize to the point of thinking this is not providing a lot of light, right? So on the technical level, let's just think about this of the internet. There's very little that the governments need to do. The internet is running itself by the technology that is interconnecting around the world. It has been amazing over the last, 30 years that this worldwide global technology is reaching the ends of the earth. That was without very little government help. Indeed, it was sometimes with government interference.
But Kathy, there
Let me
was...
go on.
yeah.
Then there's a social layer, obviously, that when we communicate and when we join together, there are social issues which governments, duly elected governments, who have the permission of their people to be involved, have the permission of their people to be involved. There are other governments that don't have that permission. The point of the internet is that it is transnational. It is of a different nature. It allows a conversation at a very different level that, in my mind, informs back to the national state. Many times now we see that it is the international conversation that is actually shifting the power in the state. I think this is a very complex issue that we need to really think about in our workshops. Now let me just say something about rough consensus. When you have such a phenomenon, if you get rough consensus, that's a good thing. That means you are working together to iterate, to keep trying to understand and to get to the next place. So in the technology area we say, right, rough consensus, running code. What does it mean? We're going to keep going. We're going to now invent the next thing. We're going to innovate on top of what we just did. That is the nature of the internet. And it is now the nature of the internet governance debate. I think it's worth watching and it's worth experimenting with.
Thank you. Fadi, the obvious question to you concerns accountability. How do you make sure that the multi-stakeholder approach doesn't privilege one actor and one group of interests over others?
First of all, by remaining very vigilant, and we see that today. You know, one decision by the organizer to pick these panelists. We're vigilant. That's good. That's how it should be. I think we should remain very vigilant to keep everyone accountable. There's no question. But I want to go back because the debate on government's role is becoming very important. And I think Dirk said it very well. We all have different roles. We have equal participation, but we have different roles. And we have different roles in different parts of the process. So by just lumping this and becoming generalists, we all have same roles, there are different roles. When we come down to establishing a public policy on child bullying in Germany, this will require a very specific role by the government. We have to accept that in different parts of the process, different players will play different roles. So I second Ivo in highlighting the importance of the blueprint for collaborative distributed internet governance that President Thomas Ilves' panel has issued recently. I urge you to look at that at internetgovernancepanel.org because it gives for the first time a view, even if it's high level, but it starts the dialogue on how all players, civil society, government, all of us, can participate in a process of distributed governance. The key words here are distributed and collaborative. That's what will work. Centralized internet governance will never work because the internet is not built this way. It's just not built this way. And it has to be collaborative. That's the key word. So let's shift, if we could, from multi-stakeholder and multilateral and the wars. Let's keep the wars for the football mondial. Amongst us, the key new word is collaborative. Let's work together, everyone in their role.
But you don't paper over the sort of unequal distribution in power of those who are supposed to collaborate, aren't you?
Each of us, including myself, I'll start with myself, need to take the responsibility of shifting from being interest-focused to being internet-focused. And many of us focus on our interests. But I need to worry about civil society, even if I'm not a member of civil society. Well, we're all part of civil society, but I'm not a member of a civil society group. I should worry about them. How many of us do that? How many of us come out of our little box and say, what about that other group? Are they really represented? There should have been more men tweeting that there aren't enough women. Most of the tweeters are women, except for one saying, where are the women? That's an attitude we should change. And governments should be working with civil society and looking for them. ICANN should the same. We haven't done enough. We need to do more of that.
Thank you. I have another question prepared for Dirk Brengelmann, which I really would like to ask. And that has to do with the scope of multi-stakeholderism. You just said various topics need various approaches and so on. So about the substantial scope, you are actually a security expert. Could you imagine a multi-stakeholder approach to be applied to a field that is much dearer and closer to state authority than internet governance, and that are security issues?
When it comes to debate on NATO defense, I think, for example, that this is an issue where government representatives are sitting together these days in the NATO Council. And when it comes to internet governance, we have seen the multi-stakeholder in its widest sense. We have seen different ways of multi-stakeholder. For example, you have within the system of ICANN, you have the GAC, which Fadi referred to. When you look at the proceedings in Geneva, you have in the first phase people coming together from all stakeholders, but then put their report to the UN system. So you have all kind of stakeholder models. There's not a single one. And I think you put your finger right there when you say on security questions right now, it's still more with the states. Yes, that's true.
But do you see would you envision a process that such policy fields could also open up to different approaches, become more transparent and inclusive?
I can envisage that, but I don't think that will be a quick and easy process.
Okay.
And I think it would probably start first in organizations like the OSCE and or the European Union before it would really come to defense organizations like NATO.
Thank you very much. Are there still questions from the audience? We are running out of time, but no? So then, if there are nothing anymore, you want to comment on each other. Kathy, do you want to do a last comment, perhaps? You have a question? Yeah, please. Go to the microphone.
Hello? Yeah, hi. Panos Kagaviaris, I'm a press and spokesperson for the Council of Europe. I actually have a question that came to mind because a friend of mine was saying that she doesn't use Google search engines anymore. She's using other ones like hidemyass.com. To what extent can anyone answer that? Is that a real concern about collecting information, doing algorithms, invading privacy? Does anyone feel like there's a need for such new search engines that are much more careful about protecting information?
I'm afraid that's out of the scope of this panel.
Okay. Thought maybe someone would comment on it, but.
I'd like to just finish up by thanking you, Professor Hoffman, for your very, very, very good moderation. So thank you. And for being a woman, apparently.